Well, hey church, welcome back to the Midweek Devotional. We are spending the next couple of weeks unpacking a sermon by Stephen, and Stephen preaches this sermon in Acts chapter 7. And we summed this sermon up in church by saying that his entire sermon could be summed up with the words, places fade, people fail, Jesus is forever. Places fade, people fail, Jesus is forever. This is really the message that Stephen is preaching to this congregation, and these people are very upset at him. They're very mad that he brings this up. This whole sermon begins with a question. Acts chapter 7, verse 1, the high priest said, "Are these things so?" Now, these things that he's mentioning are found in Acts chapter 6, verse 13 and 14. False witnesses said, "This man never ceases to speak words against this holy place and the law. For we have heard him say that this Jesus of Nazareth will destroy this place and will change the customs that Moses delivered to us." Now, in those days, any time that you mention the patriarchs, anytime that you mention the heroes of their faith, their religious faith, these people would get very upset. Stephen's sermon actually begins and it talks about Abraham for a little bit, and then it gets down to verse 9 and it says something interesting. It says, "The patriarchs, jealous of Joseph, sold him into Egypt, but God was with him." He's pointing out here that the patriarchs, who these people worship and idolize, are not quite what they think these people are. Then he goes down into verse 20. "At this time Moses was born. He was beautiful in God's sight. He was brought up for 3 months in his father's house. And when he was exposed, Pharaoh's daughter adopted him and brought him as her own son. Moses was instructed in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and he was mighty in words and deeds. When he was 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brothers, the children of Israel. And seeing one of them wrong, he defended the oppressed man and avenged him by striking down the Egyptian. He supposed that his brothers would understand that God was giving them salvation by his hand, but they did not understand. And on the following day, he appeared to them as they were quarreling." It goes on, it continues. This passage just continues to point out that he then has to flee into exile. Then, all the way down in verse 35, it says, "This Moses whom they rejected, saying, 'Who made you a ruler and a judge?' This man God sent as both ruler and redeemer by the hand of the angel who appeared to him." Then he continues down in verse 39, "Our fathers refused to obey him, but thrust him aside, and in their hearts they turned to Egypt." Now, this is a very important part of this sermon. This is a very important point that Stephen is making, and that is, patriarchs are good people, but they're people. And I think in our culture, we have a tendency to rush to one of two polar opposite views of patriarchs nowadays. Now, I don't mean necessarily Abraham and Isaac, although it could include that. But what I'm saying is those who are heroes of the faith for us. Those who maybe up in years now, and they're pastors who maybe they've passed away, or maybe they're kind of getting into that generation in their 60s, 70s, 80s, or perhaps they're pastors from years ago or 100 years ago. What we typically do with these people is very similar to what the children of Israel were doing with their patriarchs, and that is, we either will demonize them and just cast them aside because they're not young and in our generation, and they maybe don't understand how to give us the information we want in a short period of time, or maybe they've done things in the past based off of their current context and knowledge that we disagree with, and so we will cast them aside, throw them out, and demonize them and say, "Oh, they were so bad back then, we are so superior to them," and miss the opportunity to learn from them, even learn from their mistakes. Or we will idolize them. And we will, instead of being willing to ever admit that they did anything wrong, we will place them on a higher scale than even the Bible. often we will look at these older generations of pastors or of saints and say, whatever they say, we agree with. I was in a conversation recently about music with a pastor, and we were talking about music, and he pointed out, well, I have a pastor who said this. And I said, okay, well, what does the Bible say? And he was just stopped. He's a pastor who just stopped and said, well, I know that this pastor said this. And this is someone who is idolizing a patriarch of his faith. Someone who to him was very influential, and to him was someone who was very important, so much so that he was just willing to listen to what that man said and stop there, and not even acknowledge what the Bible had to say about it. And this is what these children of Israel, this generation of children of Israel that Stephen is talking to, this is what they were doing. And we can go one of two ways with this. We can either demonize the patriarchs and just cast them out and ignore them, and well, they're older. We don't really care. They say things differently. They have different issues, different problems. It doesn't matter. I need someone younger. Or we can idolize them and say, they're all that they say is what matters and all that they believe, and we just look to them. We look for quotes by them rather than looking at the scriptures. We go to their websites to see what they say rather than searching the scriptures for ourselves. Stephen is wanting and trying to point out to these people that patriarchs are people. They fail. They do good. Moses was a great guy, and the children of Israel rejected him. This is what he's saying. Like, hey, you guys rejected Moses. He was a great guy. He made mistakes, but you rejected him. The patriarchs were jealous, and they sinned against Joseph. They rejected Joseph. We can reject, or we can idolize, or I believe we can do what Stephen is trying to show us and what the Bible is trying to show us, and we can say, hey, people are people, patriarchs are people. We can thank them and give them honor where honor is due, and if they've done something in their life, we can honor that, and we can thank them for it, and we can recognize what they've done for us. I think of my life as a church planter, made so much easier by my dad who planted a church when I was a kid and I got to watch him. Made so much easier by dear elder mentors of mine who are a generation before me, who mentor me, and I got to look at what they did and how they planted a church, and I can learn from them. And we don't have to cast them out simply because they're not 27 years old. We can learn from them. We can grow from them. We can recognize the good and honor them and thank them for what they've done in our life. Hear me. Parents and grandparents are wonderful people, and we should express and demonstrate gratitude for what they've done and what they've accomplished. We don't have to idolize them, but we don't have to demonize them. We can recognize that there are those who've come before us who perhaps didn't view things the way we view them. And we don't have to honor those parts, but we can still learn from them and we can still grow from them. But at the end of the day, it's Jesus. We learn, we grow, we develop, we study, we worship Jesus, and we recognize patriarchs are people. They're people. People fail. People do great things. In this chapter, in his sermon, he goes on, he talks about how Joseph did great things, Moses did great things, David did great things, and sometimes they failed, but they also did great things. And he's showing these people that people are people. We need to give grace, give honor, learn, move on, grow, and instead of saying, well, you did one thing wrong 20 years ago, I got nothing to do with you, instead we can learn from them. We don't have to repeat that mistake, but we can still learn. And we don't have to worship them for what they've done, but we can learn. Patriarchs are people, and this is the point of Stephen's message. We'll continue in this message. We'll be looking at places next week. I just want to remind you always that you matter, Jesus matters, grace matters, and details matter. Have a great rest of your week.